Hi, my name is Minty Silva. I'm a pediatric physiotherapist, and I've recently completed my PhD through the University of Otago's Rehabilitation Teaching and Research Unit. And today I'm going to be talking to you about persuasive presentations, because my PhD was about persuasive technology and human behavior, and those things kind of come together when you're presenting something that you're trying to motivate people to do something that you want them to do and that would be good for them, or that they want to do because it would be good for them. So when I think about persuasive presentations, I think back to a talk. I have a really vivid memory of attending a conference as a young therapist, which would have been many, many years ago, where another therapist got up to speak. She was pretty unspectacular to look at. She was probably a little bit on the unhealthy weight side. Her black hair was kind of this messy, nondescript style, so not a bob, not a pixie. It wasn't really long, it wasn't short. She wore glasses and no makeup, and she had some sort of rather unremarkable grey pants and a jacket on, but she was mesmerizing. I remember her starting her talk, discussing her child. Like, I have this really clear memory of her starting her talk, discussing her child who was inconveniently sick just when she was supposed to be here at the conference, as a reason she might have to dash off. And I don't know why that sticks in my head all these years later, because I honestly don't remember what she spoke about, other than it must have been something related to speech therapy and neurodevelopmental therapy, because she was a speech therapist and it was a neurodevelopmental therapy conference. But I do remember being hooked by what she was saying, inspired, sold on whatever it was she was trying to get across in her speech. And I remember wishing I had her presence and her ability to hold a crowd, because there's really nothing more influential and nothing more powerful than a good speaker. If you think about Steve Jobs as an example and Apple, Steve Jobs was the marketing guy for Apple. He wasn't the inventor of Apples. That was Steve Wozniak, which you would know if you're a bit of an Apple fan. But Steve Jobs could hold a stage, and he was such a persuasive speaker that he just moved crowds, and everybody associates him with the whole, Apple brand. And I won't even get into politics, but a persuasive speaker in politics can move millions to action, for good or for bad. So how do you become a persuasive speaker besides, good genes and natural talent? When you're tasked with presenting an idea, sharing your work, motivating co-workers to take action on something, are there things that you can draw on to help you be more persuasive and more memorable? Yes, there are. And that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about today. But if you only take away one thing from what I talk about today, let it be this. There's really, really, really a high likelihood that the people you are presenting to in your presentation can already read. It's pretty insulting to have an audience in front of you that is perfectly literate and stand up and read your slides. If what you want to say is all on your slides already, then just send them the slides. They can read faster than you can speak, and you will have saved everyone an excruciating death by PowerPoint experience. Because people remember how you make them feel more than they remember what you say. And though the secret to a memorable speech is creating an experience for your audience, death by PowerPoint is probably not the experience you're wanting them to remember. So the first point in creating a persuasive, memorable presentation is probably as old as time itself. And it's this: if people remember how you make them feel more than what you say, then you need to weave your facts and ideas into a story, because human beings are primed to remember stories that take them on a journey where they get to share the experience with the storyteller and feel all the feels that imprint the experience into their memory in a way that facts and figures seldom do. And in addition to stories, you should use images and humor, or even better, images that use humor rather than filling your PowerPoint up with words. So when you use engaging pictures, you bypass the logic of your audience's brains and go straight to those more primitive structures that have a direct line to your audience's attention and memory. And if you can't use humor, like I can't tell a good joke on demand, or actually I can't tell a joke even when it's not on demand, then make sure to sprinkle in some analogies like this one. Explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You understand it better, but the frog dies in the process. So analogies, Analogies are a powerful tool to tap into our pre-programmed human tendencies to find patterns and links in seemingly unrelated things that surprise us. They get under the radar of our logical brain's natural skepticism or our disinterest, and they really help the audience come to their own conclusions, which in an analogy is the conclusion you intended them to come to without you having to tell them what to think, which is really a really powerful and persuasive way to get your point across. Okay, so now you have the ingredients of a persuasive presentation. You've got the story, the images, and the analogies sprinkled with a little humor if you dare. Let's talk about the parts of a persuasive presentation. Just like any story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, your presentation should have three parts: the gap, the call to action, and the vision. The gap is the critical first step to creating your presentation. It refers to the gap between where your audience is now and where they could be if they bought into whatever it is you're about to tell them. It's not about criticizing them or the current situation, but really recognizing the effort and the expertise that currently exists and showing your audience that you get them. You get where they are and you understand what they're struggling with, their pain points, because they're your pain points too. And this really builds trust and openness to what you're about to present in the call to action part, which is where you ask them to take action on your ideas. But before you get to the call to action, you really want your audience to imagine the desired outcome of what you're proposing as their desired outcome. Not only is it important that they see this as possible, the ideas that you have, but that they see it as possible for them. So, for example, when I started talking, I shared the story of where I was not a good speaker and I wanted to be, and that would be the flaw or the beginning of the gap. And then I spoke about the speaker and the others like her who capture the imagination of audiences and move them. And that would be the roof of the gap that I'm talking about in this presentation. And then I gave you some ingredients to close the gap, things like telling stories, using images and analogies, things that are really easily within your wheelhouse that makes it possible for you to imagine being able to close that gap and get to where you want to go. It's possible for you to use these things. And it's really only now 5 minutes into the presentation or so that we get to the call to action or the steps you need to take to actually write your speech. So where are we going to go? What steps you need to take to get a persuasive presentation done? And I'm guessing if you're still listening, then you're probably interested in hearing what I have to say next, and probably much more interested than if I just jumped in and said, you know, step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is that. Because stories are so powerful, even in academic work and work-related presentations, or maybe even especially when you're presenting academic and work-related presentations, because stories keep our attention, they keep our interests, they build relationships, and they help us get on the same page. All right, so now we have the 3 parts to the speech: the gap, the call to action, and the vision. Let's talk about what actually makes up those parts through 3 steps. We're going to talk about planning, prepping, and practicing. Okay, so in the plan, you want to have for your speech 1 take-home message, and make sure that you have no more than 3 points. So my take-home message is to create an experience for your audience using stories that doesn't include death by PowerPoint. And I have 3 main points that I want to get across in this presentation. I want you to know about the ingredients of a presentation, so stories, pictures, analogies, and maybe humor. I want you to know about the parts of a presentation: the gap, the call to action, and the vision. And then this last part is the steps of putting the presentation together, so planning, prepping, and practicing. And when you're talking about stories, or when you're thinking about stories, think about each part of those points. What stories or analogies can really help you to make a point with each part of the presentation, those 3 parts that you're trying to get across. So what would be useful in really illustrating those key points in your presentation? And note that research stories also work, especially in our environment. So quoting a few studies to bring your point across in a conversational style, research shows, this latest study showed, that kind of thing, really also counts towards good stories and analogies, because as professionals, we tend to hook into those stories as well, and they are stories. Okay, and then the preparation, because you're creating experience for your audience, you're kind of creating a story that takes them on a journey. You need to start with writing that story or journey out. So you don't start with putting the graphs and the images that you want onto your slides. You start with writing your story out, and then you think about where those graphs and images and content actually fit into the story and the analogies that you can use with them. And you'll get a much better idea of which pictures will work to illustrate your key points, and where your actual data and graphs and important information sit in your story when you first start with the story, rather than starting by putting stuff on a PowerPoint. You know, sometimes people will go, oh, I've got a 15-minute presentation, so that's, you know, about 2 minutes per slide, so I'm going to have 7 slides, and what am I going to fill the 7 slides up with? It doesn't work as well in creating an experience when you start with the slides. Start with the story, get your story in your time limit, and then you can have some long slides that you talk to, some short slides that you talk to. It doesn't matter, as long as the slides get your point across on that more sort of subconscious persuasive level. And then beware the death by PowerPoint. You will be tempted to write the important points down on your slides, but really try and limit yourself to things that you can take in at a glance. Less is more. Your audience won't remember all the details anyway. And if there's stuff that you really want them to remember, a nice report to accompany your slides is often a welcome addition to a good presentation. But there are two separate things. Your report and your presentation have different purposes. Your report is information, your presentation is experience. And then practice. So practice reading your script, practice reading it slowly. I have a problem with reading things slowly. But really, if you give yourself extra time, it means that when you're giving your talk, you can really be present with your audience and talk to them, because you know you've got enough time to do that. And then once you've got your talk done, you add your script to your PowerPoint slides and you practice again. And then if you're really brave, delete as much as you can out of your PowerPoint presentation practicing words, because the less words you have to read, the more likely you are to talk to your audience and engage with them, and the more engaging then your presentation will be. So practice your beginning and your end more as a prepared speech, and leave the middle bit more as an ad-lib speech, where you kind of add in the detail as you're going, because you're familiar with it and you can talk to it if people were to ask you questions. So it's much more engaging. But the beginning and the end are really nice when they're well prepared, flowing words, because those sandwich your presentation for your audience and will be the things that leave the biggest impression with them. So although we write eloquently, and when you read what you've written, it's tempting to want to kind of say it in that way because it sounds so much better, the audience that's listening will respond so much more on a relationship and emotional level to your actual real conversation. Okay, so this is a little slide that you can have access to that kind of goes through the parts of the story. So really your take-home message, that one thing that you want to weave into different points throughout your story, talking about experiences, talking about death by PowerPoint, talking about stories. And then you want to kind of really imagine the gap, determine what your call to action is, and determine your vision. And then you've got your 3 points, and each point can have a story and or an analogy and some visual pictures. You want to list your key points out, and that's where you start to slot in your data and your graphs and your tables from the research that you've done. And don't forget to really address why people should care about the information that you're sharing with them, because if it's important for them, it's much more likely that you're going to persuade them about the importance of whatever it is you're trying to get across. Okay, so you've created the gap and the possibilities to close the gap, and you want your presentation to specifically call people in your audience to action. And the premise of a persuasive speech is to persuade your audience to move from where they are now to where you want them to be. And when you do that, it doesn't matter if that's changing what they do or changing what they think. It all counts. Thoughts and actions are all behaviors that we can address in a persuasive speech. So there are likely to be 4 types of people in your audience. And I got this from this book, Resonate, which is a great book to read about presenting visually engaging presentations. But basically, there are 4 types of people, and they're not exact subsets of people. People can kind of move between these, but it's good to recognize that different people at different times are primed for different behaviors. And when somebody's already primed for a behavior, all they need is a tiny little nudge to get the momentum going to take that action that you're asking or persuading them to take. So what this means is that your call to action should include something that appeals to each of the different behavior types. So there's doers, suppliers, influencers, and innovators. And if you go back to the slide here, you can see the call to action addresses each of those. So your doers are people who like to take action. They want things that they can do or assemble projects. They want to just be able to get started on something or start collecting things. And so that leads on to your suppliers, who are people who like to find things. They want to know what resources will be useful, how much funding you'll need, what items they can contribute to the project. So you want to make sure you include some of that information. And then your influencers are your cheerleaders, the people who have the power to make things really happen for you or connect you to the people who can. They want to know how they can support the project and empower others to take action. So again, make sure you include something for them that would be interesting and motivating. And lastly, there are the innovators. So these are the creatives, those people who come up with novel ways of doing things or problem solving big issues, discovering new ways to make things work. If you speak to each of these in your call to action, then you're so much more likely to get people in your audience excited about how they can contribute to your ideas. But don't end your presentation on a call to action, because you want to give your audience one more boost of motivation to carry the excitement of your presentation out of the presentation and into the real world. So spend time really crafting a memorable ending. The end of your presentation should summarize your take-home points, highlight the key benefits, and then end with your vision of what the world would look like once your idea is successfully implemented. That way, the audience leaves your presentation already excited about what's possible, knowing what they need to do to make it happen. And instead of you having to chase up to see if you can get them motivated, they're phoning and emailing you after the presentation with their ideas on how to get started. Did you see what I did there? That was painting the vision of how the world would look at the end of your successfully implemented persuasive presentation. And I hope you can picture it, because then you can go make it happen. You have all the ingredients, the paths and the steps. All that's waiting for you to do is plug in the content. Good luck.